3 ways to store butternut squash. First up, let's talk about keeping your squash fresh. If your squash is whole and uncut, you're in luck. Find a cool, dark place like a closet or cellar and let it hang out for up to a month. Just make sure it's not too cold or damp down there, or you might end up with a mushy mess. Now, if you've got a butternut with a few battle scars, like a broken stem or some blemishes, don't worry. It's not the end of the world, but you'll want to use it sooner rather than later. These imperfections can lead to faster spoilage, so keep an eye on them. If you're planning on storing your squash in the fridge, you'll need to do a little prep work. Grab a vegetable peeler and get ready to do some skin removal. Start by slicing off the stem, then peel away that tough outer layer until you hit the bright orange flesh underneath. It's like a treasure hunt, but with vegetables. Once your squash is peeled, you've got a choice to make, to cut or not to cut. If you're going for smaller pieces, slice your squash horizontally and scoop out the seeds. Then, chop it up into cubes or spirals, depending on how you plan to use it later. Just remember, safety first. Keep those fingers away from the blade. When it's time to store your cut-up squash, reach for some trusty containers. Resealable bags or plastic containers work like a charm. Make sure they're sealed tight and label them with the date so you don't forget when you put them in there. Your fridge will keep them fresh for about 5 days, but if they start looking a little suspect, it's time to toss them. One last tip for fridge storage: keep your squash away from ripening fruits like apples and pears. These guys give off a gas that can make your squash go bad faster than you can say butternut. If you've got cut or cooked squash in a sealed container, you're safer, but it's still best to store them separately if you can. Next up, let's talk about freezing. This is where you can really extend the life of your butternut bounty. Start by peeling and cutting your squash into 1-inch cubes. Spread them out on a baking tray, making sure they're not too cozy with each other. Pop them in the freezer for about an hour, or until they're solidly frozen. Once your squash cubes are icy, transfer them to a freezer bag or container. Squeeze out as much air as you can and label it with the date. These little nuggets of goodness will last up to 8 months in your freezer, ready to jump into soups, stews, or whatever your heart desires. Okay, finally let's talk about curing. If you're lucky enough to have freshly harvested squash, this is the method for you. Start by sunbathing your squash for up to 10 days. No SPF needed. Just make sure it's in a spot with good airflow. After a week or so, give your squash the fingernail test. If you can't make a dent, it's ready for long-term storage. But before you tuck it away, give it a little bath. Mix up some diluted bleach or vinegar water and give your squash a good rinse. This will help keep any unwanted bacteria or mold at bay. Finally, find a cool, dry spot to store your cured squash. Aim for temperatures between 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit and humidity levels around 50 to 70%. A basement or cool closet works well. Keep your squash on a shelf, away from any moisture, and it should last up to 3 months. So there you have it, 3 ways to store your butternut squash for maximum deliciousness. Thank you for joining us today. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more insightful content.